It's a little bit of a windy day here, and generally you don't inspect a brood nest when it's windy, but we're going to go ahead anyway and take a look at this brood nest. Today we're going to be covering how to check if your queen is laying healthy brood. So to do that, we're going to open up this hive and check on the frames. Now, if there's good presence of eggs, larvae and capped brood, then you know you have a laying queen. So we're going to be looking at that and checking also that the brood looks healthy. So the first thing we're going to do is a couple of good puffs in the hive entrance with the smoker. So I'm going to do that now. It's only a small colony, so it doesn't need too much smoke. Then we're just going to leave the smoker at the hive entrance so the bees continue to get a waft of smoke, which will keep them in a calm phase. As usual, make sure you protect yourself to minimise stings. Have a good bee suit. If you're new to beekeeping, also wear your gloves. As you get more confident, you can decide whether to wear gloves or not. So what I'm doing now is just zipping up the bee suit, making sure all 3 zips. The bee jacket like this is my favourite one with the nice ventilation. Okay, so that's all done up. Do remember that some people are severely allergic to bees, and we do have safety information for you to read on all our pages. Next thing to do is, if your flow hive is the flow hive 2 model, then you can undo these little winglets on the side and lift the hive roof off. So we're just going to put that aside. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll cover them during this call. Next thing to do is insert your hive tool between the inner cover and the brood box like this. Now I'm lifting this off nice and gently, and on the underside I'm having a quick look for the queen, and there she is. So really good idea to check the inner cover for the queen, because you don't want to orphan the queen from the hive. So spotting a queen there's a few tips to spotting a queen, and you can see her abdomen is much longer and more pointed. That's so she can put her bottom down the cell and lay an egg right at the bottom. There's also, notice she has less stripy markings, and not always, but most of the time she has less stripy markings. Also notice she struts around with the kind of elegant purpose compared to the other bees. She moves quite quickly. So I'm going to hold the inner cover over the brood nest in case she does fall off. So you can see her there. She also moves with bigger strides and she has bigger legs. But it's often the way you'll pick her out amongst the 20,000 odd bees you're looking in the brood nest for, is the way she moves. And she often has a bit of a clearing behind her as she moves as well. So that's another way to pick it up, is look for that pattern, look for the kind of wake she leaves behind her. So because I don't want to orphan the queen from the hive, it's always a good idea to lean this up against the hive entrance just in case you've missed her. But because I know she's there, I'm actually going to put her back into the hive to make sure she doesn't get left out. So if I just put this down here, she'll probably crawl right into the hive now. There she is. And in you go. Okay, I'm just going to give her a gentle shake now. There she goes. So she just went down in between these 2 frames.
Peter, we're having a little bit of audio issue. If you could just speak up a little.
Okay, a bit of an audio issue. Hopefully that'll go away. So Generally what you do once you open the inner cover is lean it up against the hive entrance like this. And that way, if the queen happens to be on the inner cover, she can crawl into the hive entrance. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is pull out a brood frame. So to do that, we're going to add a little bit of smoke to where we want to work. And if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them. Using the chisel end of your hive tool, place it between the frames and just lever them apart a little bit because they get quite stuck together with propolis and wax. Next we're going to cut any burr or brace comb that's joining the frame together, and the reason why we want to do that is so that these bits of wax don't harm the comb surface as you pull the frame up. Okay, we're having audio issues. Just stand by while we do that. Is it chunking in and out like a hard click? So that's a
And it's cracking as well.
probably a hardware issue. Okay. So here we are cutting the burr and brace comb between the frames. Okay. Reason why we're doing that is to make sure we can pull the frame up nice and gently without harming the comb surface with these bits of protruding wax. Okay, this frame looks like it's free to come up. J end goes under your frame end bar and levers against the adjacent one. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below. We'll get to answering them. So I'm just gently lifting up that frame. Okay. So you can see here we've got lots of brood. So already we can tell we've got a nice laying queen. When it's clockwork like that across the frame, then it's a really healthy brood pattern. There is the odd cell missing, but that's pretty normal. But all of those bees are going to hatch out within the next 9 days. They spend about 9 days in the capped larvae phase as they metamorphosis, grow their wings and hatch as a bee. So this is an older comb, so it's got a darker presence. This was a split from another hive, and this is one of the original frames. So the brood should have slightly curved cappings. If the cappings are sunken in, then it's a sign that we're in trouble and there could be some disease presence. So you're looking out for a nice brood with a curved capping. It's beautiful. Okay, we've got a couple of questions, so if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them.
Peter, Haddon would like to know, how do you close your hive for winter?
Okay, closing a hive for winter is something that we don't actually have to do in this area because we're in a subtropical region where the bees can forage all year round. But there is a few tips and tricks, and if you want to know more about it, there's some FAQs on our honeyflow.com page. But basically what you're trying to do for winter is make sure the bees have enough stores to last the winter and access to those stores. So if they don't have enough honey, you may need to feed them prior to winter to build up those stores. And one of the main things you need to think about is the queen being able to move with the bee ball up through the hive. So if you have a setup like this and you want to leave the super on for winter, it's a choice that some beekeepers do and some don't, then you'll leave the super on but take out the queen excluder. The reason why you need to take out the queen excluder is so the queen bee can move up with the bees as they continue to eat the honey out of the super. Otherwise she might get left behind in the cold down the bottom. Okay, so that's a very nice frame of brood. I'm going to put that aside just by leaning it up against the hive.
So Rebecca has noticed that you've got viewing windows on the brood box. Does this cause any issues with the bee and the brood?
Look, it doesn't, and this is the I guess it's the advantage of being the inventor. We get to play around. So our hives that we sell don't have brood windows on the brood box, but this one does, well noticed. It is a nice thing, and it's something we may offer in the future. Okay, lifting gently up another frame. So this frame is naturally drawn comb. There's no wax or wires or foundation. And what we're looking at here is nice, fresh wax that they've drawn recently, and you can see some nice fresh capped brood here in this area. So that's what it looks like when it's in new comb. Notice it's a lot lighter in colour. Also down the cells you can see grubs or larvae. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for capped brood, larvae down the cells, or bee eggs. Now, if a queen had only just started laying, the only signs you might see that she's there are eggs down the bottoms of the cells. And the eggs look like a tiny grain of rice in the very bottom. So we can already tell there's a healthy queen here by the way she laid on that first frame like clockwork. That's a very good sign. And there's larvae and there's eggs, and we also spotted the queen. It's not necessary to spot the queen to tell whether your queen is laying, but it's fun to spot the queen, and as your skills progress you'll get better at doing that. Here's some more capped brood. So this is capped worker brood. Drone brood sits more proud of the honeycomb because drones are bigger. We'll have a look at some of those shortly. These are all worker brood with the cells more in line with the surface of the honeycomb. So the worker bees hatch from the egg, and they spend about 9 days in the cell in their larvae stage, and then about another 9 days in the capped phase before they hatch out as a bee ready to do all of the chores around the hive. And an interesting thing is the workers prepare the cells for the bees, and they actually leave a pheromone behind to say that cell is ready to lay in, and the queen comes along and goes, okay, there's a nice cell ready to lay in. It's a bit like the door hanger saying the room's nice and clean and ready to go. Here you can see some drone brood, the way it sticks out proud of the honeycomb.
Stephanie's wondering what kind of bees are here.
These are Italian bees. So you get all sorts of different bees from bee breeders. Italian bees are typically this gold colour, and nice friendly bee usually. You can also get Caucasians, which are darker in colour, and all sorts of other breeds. but they're all a species of Apis mellifera.
Bud would like to know, how long does it take for the bees to make enough honey that it's ready to harvest?
So, great question. It really depends. The question is, how long does it take the bees to make honey that's ready to harvest? And the question, the answer is, if you have a really strong colony and a lot of flowers and those two things line up, then the bees can collect a lot of nectar quite quickly and fill your honey super. The quickest I've seen it happen is a full super like this in a week, but it can take months and months, or sometimes you don't even get any honey stored in a season because there was a drought, or there was not much forage, or your hive was weak. So it really does depend. It's always good to have more than one hive, so if your hive's a bit weak and going slow, you can still get some honey from your other one.
And is there only one queen per hive?
So, is there only one queen per hive? That's a good question. There's only one laying queen per hive, but they will raise another queen, and you will sometimes see two queens in a hive. And it's a supersedure phase where the new queen will fight the old queen, and that's how they maintain a strong, healthy hive. Or they'll swarm and split, and it's another way they divide. So generally there's one queen.
Nev has a really interesting question. He asks, if you remove the queen excluder so the queen can feed on the honey in the super during winter, won't you fill the super up with brood? And if so, how do you get her and the brood out of there for future harvest?
Okay, come springtime, what you're going to need to do if you've left the flow frames on your hive over winter is shake all of the bees down into the bottom box, put your excluder in place and put your hive back together, and then she'll start laying in the appropriate spot. If she has laid a few eggs in the flow frames, then over time they'll hatch, and that issue will go away. So many beekeepers decide to take their supers off over winter, or their flow frames off over winter, but you don't have to. It's a case of come the next springtime, making sure the queen is down the bottom. So if you see a frame like this with sporadic brood pattern, so there's some brood here, and lots of empty cells, and straight away it's a good idea to keep looking, look for any sunken cappings. It's often when you have disease you get a more erratic laying pattern. So right now I'm looking for signs of AFB or EFB in sunken darker cappings that may even have a piercing through the top of its in later stage. But I'm looking down the cells and I can see eggs and I can see young larvae, so it's just that this frame a lot of bees have hatched from, and it's going through another cycle.
Zirian's wondering, is there a minimum distance that should be between the hives?
There isn't a minimum distance between beehives. In honey houses, they're literally wall to wall, back to back along each other, and that's fine for the bees. But and commercial apiaries, often they'll put them on a pallet where they're right up against each other. However, if you put them more than 10 metres apart, then that is said to stop the drifting between hives, which is a little bit better for disease. There's varying different opinions, but if your hives are closer together, you get more drift and sharing of bees between those hives. Okay, so I can put that frame back in. Once you've got one frame out, you have space to take the other frames and put them back again. And once you've got one frame out, you can go sideways, which makes it a lot easier to lift your frames out. So again, I've got one of the older frames here that looks dark. We've got an erratic laying pattern, and I'm checking to see if there's any sunken dark cappings on the brood. Everything looks okay, and I can see the grubs or larvae down the cells. We'll be covering more of that when we do pests and disease inspections.
Bradford would like to know, how do hives do by the beach? He lives in Southern California and wants a hive, but not sure if it's a wise fit.
The coastal regions are often a great place to keep bees because there's more flowers for more of the season. Where I am here on the coast, we get flowers all winter, and it's a subtropical region, so some of our best honey flows are actually right through the winter time. And what that means is we don't have to shift the hives, we don't have to feed the hives, and it's a great place to keep bees.
Brian's asking, why do they lay in the bottom and store honey in the top?
Bees like to store their gold away from the entrance because robber bees like to come and steal that honey, and if it's near the entrance it's a bit easier to get out, so they generally like to store the honey away from the entrance. Now if you put an entrance at the top, they may keep the honey lower down, but there's another thing, and I'm not sure why, but they generally like to put honey above brood, so they prefer an entrance lower down, it seems. Okay, we'll pull out another frame. I'm just gently lowering that one back in. It's a nice calm hive. It's not always the case. Sometimes you have to keep adding a little bit of smoke to your hive to maintain them in a calm way. So here we have another nice frame of brood. This is another fresh, naturally drawn comb. There's quite a lot of brood looking healthy here, and it's got lighter capping because it's on a freshly drawn comb.
David's wondering, do the bees help feed the queen, or does she need to access the honey herself?
The bees feed the queen, so she's incapable of feeding herself. So when a queen bee gets sent in a mail, they'll send her with 5 escort bees and a block of candy so that they can feed her in transit.
Juan would like to know, what do you do if you find a cell with possible AFB?
So if you find a cell with AFB, then there's some tests you can do to check it, and the most common one is to get a little matchstick, poke it in the cell and pull it out, and if it looks all ropey and goopy, then that's AFB, and what you'll need to do is send a sample away for testing. That's a free service here in Australia, not sure about other countries. When you put that stick, make sure you throw it back into the hive. You don't want to leave that around for other hives to get the spores from. And as to what to do, it's the worst thing you can get as a beehive, and the hive will need to be destroyed. Often beekeepers will burn or irradiate the hive after killing their bees. So that's a really sad thing, and I hope as a new beekeeper that never happens to you. The regulations vary in different countries as to what you are allowed to do with AFB, so it's important you look up your local legislation. Here in Australia, we must burn the hive and bury the remains. the supers can be irradiated and reused. In other countries there's different rules. Like any animal husbandry, there is the sad moments, but I'm happy to say I haven't had many of those in my couple of decades keeping lots of bees. Beautiful. So there's another thing that can happen. Today we're covering how to look and see if your brood is happy and healthy, and if you have a laying queen. And there's one thing that can happen. If you look in here and there's only really sporadic brood, then you might start looking further, and you might actually find that the workers are laying and you don't actually have a queen. Now, how to tell if that's going on is you look down the cells, and if there's multiple eggs per cell, or eggs that are on the side walls of the cells, because the worker bees are not so long in the body and they can't get it to the bottom, then that is laying workers, not a laying queen. Laying workers can only lay unfertilized eggs, which means they'll turn into drones. So you'll also see drone brood developing and no worker brood developing. If that happens, you'll need to get a queen into your hive, or the resources for them to make one, which means eggs or larvae under 3 days old from another hive. So something to look out for is laying workers. But if you're seeing nice worker brood like we see in here, then you've definitely got a laying queen, because all of those are female fertilized eggs that are now in the capped phase, waiting to hatch out soon. So, yeah, we got time for a couple more questions.
Angus is wondering, can you show a good technique on how to close up the hive without squashing too many bees?
Without squashing too many bees?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I can show you that now. So, Angus is asking how to close up the hive without squashing too many bees. It is tricky, and the more populated your hive gets, the harder that becomes. So for a start, I'm just gently easing the frames back together, because I don't want to squash bees between the frame end bars. So if you have a look down here, you're just checking that there's no bees between these frame end bars here as you close it in. If there is, you can give a little wiggle as you close, and that gives a little bit of time and space for those bees to get out of the way. Okay, I'm doing that now. Putting those frames back together. And it's important, if you can, get the same order as they came out in. That way you don't have the issues where there's comb pressed up against each other, and things like beetles can then take over. Have a look at this. The bees are festooning across this gap. They're holding hands and feet. They're developing scaffolding for building comb. They're going, there's no comb here, we need to start building, let's get right to it. So they're holding hands and feet across the gap, preparing to build comb. Isn't that amazing? I'm just going to pick up the frame that we first pulled out and gently lower it down.
Barbara's asking, would you consider this to be a strong colony?
This is it's becoming a strong colony, I would say. It was a split from the hive next to us here. They've filled out all the frames now, and they've got a nice amount of bees. When this is totally packed full and they've drawn all the frames completely, then it's time to add the super. So it's not a strong colony yet, but it's a strong start to the brood nest. Okay, so the question was how to put the hive back together without squashing bees. So the first thing to do is shake all the bees off the inner cover, especially around this rim area. So I'm going to do that now just by shaking like that. There's only a couple of bees left here. Now the next thing to do is check around the rim and see that there's no bees right in that area where this lid is going to close. Now a colony like this that isn't really strong yet, it's quite easy to put that down without squashing bees. As they develop, you might need to add smoke around the rim to get the bees to clear off this area. And another technique is you can put the lid on a slight angle like that and give it a little twist, so any bees in those areas here and here are getting pushed sideways rather than a lid coming down on them. That can make it slightly easier as well. Next thing to do is put the lid back on. So I'm just dropping that over nice and square, and that's it. So today we covered how to check if your hive has a healthy laying queen, and we had a look. We spotted the queen. We could see that there was eggs, there was larvae, there was capped brood, and there is clearly a healthy laying queen. So this hive should do well. As the nectar flows come on, it'll breed up and it'll be time to add a super. Thank you very much for watching, and tune in again next time.